use your persona ability.
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we are going back to Persona 3. Now, if I take one good hard look at the Persona community, the conversations that happen within it, when it comes to the trifecta of what I like to call relevant Persona titles, excluding 1 and 2 for now, you take a look at 3, 4, and 5, it always feels like Persona 3 gets the most criticism. And I don't really think it's the fault of the game, but rather the amount of versions that there are and how confusing it can be for fans and how experiences will vary, so to say. And I'll be breaking down all of that, but we're asking ourselves two questions in this video today. Number one, is it really as bad as people are saying? That's important to answer because right now Persona 3 Portable is available on Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch. However, I also want to ask the question, was I wrong? Because I have only played Persona 3 Portable, so I spent some time with Persona 3 FES playing Persona 3 in a 3D environment for the first time, and I got some thoughts. So we are going to go all in on the history of Persona 3. If you're new here and you're into JRPGs, nostalgia, and retrospective content, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. With that, the history of Persona 3, because I think it's important to set that up before we get into the meat and potatoes of the game. So first and foremost, Persona 3 is what I like to call the game changer. It is the first bold step in a new direction for the series. When you look at Persona 1 and 2, you'll notice they're mostly in line with the Shin Megami Tensei gameplay style. First-person dungeon crawling. It was extremely difficult. It didn't really veer off the path that SMT set up for it, but I think it needed that defining factor, and it's no surprise to anyone now that when Persona 3 dropped, it's what really put the series on the map because they changed the whole formula. I think the only thing that really stayed consistent were the demons that you would eventually farm, as well as the school life system. But they really pushed it far here in Persona 3, adding the likes of social links, straying away from SMT, as well as how you want to spend your day. It became an RPG and a life sim, and it was very different. So with that are some growing pains, hence a lot of the criticisms of the game. But most of those criticisms are found because there's a lot of inconsistency between the three versions that I'm holding in my hands. Now, Persona 3 also has had some spin-offs. You may be looking at Persona 4 Arena Ultimax going, well, why is that in the pile? That's a Persona 4 game. I'll explain in a moment. We're going to put that to the side now. And then out of nowhere recently, Persona 3 Dancing in Moonlight had come out on PlayStation 4 and Vita. So with this trifecta here, we're going to break down each of these versions and then get into the thick of it with the games. Let's start off with base Persona 3, the complete in-box experience. Here you have the cover art with the protagonist. Then you have Mitsuru, Junpei, and Akihiko. You got the Dark Hour in the background with Tartarus. You'd love to see that. And then on the back here, you'll see it's got that Square Enix energy. You see no description of the gameplay, just sick art, Thanatos, protagonist. You're like, what's going on here, man? And the themes of Persona are what drive the game forward. More on that in a moment. But for now, let's crack it open. So as you see here, you got Orpheus, you got the main protagonist, you got a wonderful piece of illustration here. One of my favorites from all of the Persona series. And now let's take a look at this manual here. It's one of the better manuals in gaming. Why is that? Well, first of all, the silhouettes with the evokers are cool, but much like Persona 4, there's that defining factor at the back of the book with the fusion chart, which I always thought was really cool. Over here, you see Tatsumi Port Island, then you see Orpheus and the Dark Hour, all important elements of the game. The prologue writes, the main character of Persona 3 is a high school student who was orphaned as a young boy. He is recently transferred to Gekugan High School in Port Island, the city he lived in 10 years ago. Shortly after moving into the school's dormitory, the main character is attacked by a shadow. The assault awakens his persona, Orpheus, his only chance at defeating this creature of the night. He soon discovers that he shares this special ability with other students at his new school. From them, he learns of the Dark Hour, a hidden time that exists between one day and the next, swarming with shadows that feed on the minds of their victims. The main character decides to join the Specialized Extracurricular Execution Squad SEES, and under the supervision of the school chairman Shuji Ikutsuki, he and his new friends confront this new evil threat. Now, all of those elements I discussed being time, the social stuff, as well as the SEES are very important. We'll get into them in a little bit, but here we have, Maddie, right? Maddie, when you see character portraits and descriptions and it's all colorized, that's when you're speaking my language here. So you see Yukari and the protagonist, you see Junpei, Akihiko, Igor, Mitsuru, Shuji. Now, what may confuse you here is you change pages. Where's the rest of the squad? I always found that interesting. Now, on the front cover of the manual of FES, you actually see all of the social links and characters like Aegis, for example, which is just shout out to Aegis. I love her character so much, but you'll see that they didn't squander certain characters who were missing from the booklet here. But I respect this. Why is that? Because there were so many manuals we've gone through on this channel that spoil their own game, like hidden levels, hidden characters within the manual. It's like, what was the point of even making it secret content then? So as always with the manuals, they go through starting the game and whatnot, but the real defining quality here is the flow of the game, being how time is spent, where you have early morning, lunch hour, afternoon, and after school. Now, not every day goes through that structure, but those are the available time slots, so to say. And you can spend that time however you want. The booklet actually breaks down a couple of examples here. In your school life, you'll actually answer some questions during class, like I showed in our Persona 4 video. When you answer those questions, you'll get skills. You'll get an increase in skills like your charm, your academics will go up. You can also join club activities. You can hang out with classmates and you'll get bonuses by hanging out with them. So it all interconnects. And then there are phases of the moon here, which also connect to the overall dungeon experience in the game, like if it's a full moon or not. And they go through some of the places that you can explore. Now, to me, this was all a whole new world when I fired up Persona 3 FES, because I had only played Persona 3 Portable. And so when I was running around in 3D, I was like, wait, there isn't a cursor in this game. This is all exploration I can do. It was wild to see, but perhaps more wilder, some of the missing scenes that I recognized were new in FES to me, but were missing in Portable. I'll break that down in a moment, but just continuing this manual here, Tartarus, pretty controversial part of the game. We have to have a whole section dedicated to that. They break down things like giving commands and things you can do with your team, but get this, you can only in base Persona 3 as well as FES control the protagonist, not the rest of your party. Now with Persona 3 Portable, that differs. But here you're gonna see more personas. Fusing them works the same as it does in Persona 4 as we broke down. You're gonna increase your social links, be able to use that experience from your social links to increase the level of the personas that you fuse. And then going through battle, just some basic commands, tactics, what certain icons in the game mean, fusion spells, and then as we get to the back of the booklet, the fusion table. And then here, I think there's a promotion for the soundtrack. And here you get the actual full party alongside the track list, which you love to see, right? Just like, Persona soundtracks are goated. So we're not gonna go through FES as much, given that it is quite literally the same package as Persona 3, but here's the difference maker. Persona 3 FES, it says step back into the night, and it breaks it down here that you play the original 70-hour game with brand new personas, events, and a hard play mode. But here is the differentiating factor. Think of this like Persona 5 Royal, Persona 4 Golden versus their base experiences, right? It says, or jump right into the new 30+ hours of content found in the all-new chapter, The Answer. So think of it this way. This game has just the journey, which is the main storyline. This game has the journey and the answer. This game also adds hard mode and brand new events. Now, both of these games here have 3D exploration. Let's get into Persona 3 Portable now. You'll see here, wait, who's that? Who is that? This game, as you'll note on the back, has a male protagonist and a female protagonist, a first ever for the series, and it hasn't happened since. Now on the inside, you'll see Orpheus, you're gonna see the coffins because the theme of this game is life and death. And then crack open the manual, you'll see it's relatively similar, breaking down the school life, but the difference in color is cool. Female protagonist is that color, male protagonist is that color. And they go through the same things that we just went over, the flow of the game, the map icons, but the difference is how they're displayed in this game. But otherwise, combat looks and feels the same. And this is the version that's available on modern consoles. And the reason this manual is so thick is because then they have the French version back here. So this is also extremely expensive, might I add, but I wanted to make sure I got all of these complete in-box experiences to pull it all together. And now you can see each of them I'm gonna break down the features. So you already saw Persona 3/FES. Now you'd think when Persona 3 Portable drops on the PSP, that is going to have everything that's happened within the Persona 3 family since the initial release. So you think you're gonna have the 3D, you think you're gonna have the answer, and all those new personas and events. But instead, Persona 3 Portable is actually a game that does not have the answer. It's a visual novel style experience where you have a cursor that lets you select where you want to go. You can control party members in this game, which makes it the definitive combat experience. There is the female protagonist, but the catch here is that they're missing scenes from the base game. So when I played Persona 3 FES, I'm like, I don't remember this cutscene at all. But when I played Persona 3 Portable, you just notice in hindsight how many different parts of the story are skipped. Now, as someone who loved Persona 3 based off what I played on Portable, I'm gonna kind of go out on a limb here and say ignorance is bliss in this case. But also, I can't enjoy 3 FES as much without being able to control my party members. And that's the problem with Persona 3. As I said, you have all these different experiences here, and there's not a single version that just goes whoop and brings them all together. None of that. Better yet, the worst problem is the answer, a story, is continued in this game. So that's why this is here. And that's kind of how Persona 3 works as a family of games. It's kind of confusing if you're not in the thick of it, but point being, there are features, stories, mechanics scattered across all these versions, and there's not that one definitive version that pulls it all together. And that is the problem with Persona 3. Beyond its growing pains, it's that you don't have that one-stop shop that you can say, like with Persona 4 Golden, like with Persona 5 Royal. Hey, here's a thing with everything from the base game that you loved, plus more, right? You don't have that with Persona 3. You go, well, if you want to play the answer, you should play FES, but you can't control your party members. But if you want to play as a female and get some cool scenes that are unique to her and a brand new soundtrack in there, by the way, that is fire, then you should go play Portable. Oh, and you can control your party members. It's like, wow, it's so scattered. And it's this game that needs a remake more than any other Persona game just to have that collective definitive version. That's why I asked the question, is it really that bad? And also, was I wrong? Because as I'm going through FES, I'm like, there are parts of this I like way more. I obviously like seeing these party members interact more. I thought it was kind of disconnected and Portable, but now I recognize like, oh, it's because a lot of the scenes were chopped out. But as I'm playing FES, when I die in what is a very hard game, I'm just sitting there going, well, I couldn't control what Junpei was about to do there. You can only give them orders based on how the AI should operate. To me, that's an immediate nope. I will go play Portable. That's why I would recommend Portable, but it differs from person to person. Hopefully this game gets remade because, you know, when you look at ATLUS, they just seem to be allergic to things that make them a lot of money. But Persona 3 Remake, it speaks for itself. Why is that? There are mechanics even in Persona 5 that you can see were born in Persona 3. Let's take mementos in Persona 5, for example. You're going lower and lower and lower, deeper into what is thematically the public consciousness. Now, as you're going deeper and deeper, you'll notice that there are blocks that are separated by multiple levels in a dungeon. Guess where that came from? Persona 3's Tartarus, probably the most controversial part of Persona 3. The reason for that is because Persona 3's Tartarus goes 264 floors, and nope, there is no visual diversity. And there are certain stretches in the game where you are going to scale upwards of 100 floors at once, if you so desire. When you mesh that with its difficulty where some enemies will hit you like a bus, I will fully admit here, I played it on easy because it's just miserable on any other difficulty. As far as I'm concerned, it makes it for a boring dungeon crawling experience where even Persona 4, which just breaks it up into 10 floors and they're more thematically driven, it's there that you go, okay, this is what it should have been. Now with Persona 5 out, with palaces existing, Persona 3 should really just take that template of palaces and apply it to the different blocks within Tartarus. So for example, 20 floors of Tartarus are reserved for a single block. What if that was just turned into a single dungeon that performed like a palace? That's what we're kind of looking for. What you get instead is, as I said, dungeon crawling with, if you're not playing Persona 3 Portable, combat that you can only control the main character in. Now, much like you've seen in Persona 4 and 5, the main character can get all these different persona. Think of it like Pokemon. You can summon them whenever you want. You can fuse them together, make brand new ones using your social links that'll power them up to all new heights. So all those elements are still there. It's just the lack of control that gets in the way. So yeah, the gameplay and the overall experience of dungeon crawling can be hit or miss, as can the social links. While I think there are great social links in 4, 5, and yes, even 3, 3 has the weakest ones, but you have to look at it from a certain angle, which is, like I said at the start, I view this game as the game changer. Like without Persona 3, you don't get 4, you don't get 5, and all the elements that they were able to build off of. And since what Persona 3 was doing was so brand new at the time, especially to the industry, it was that moment there where you have a couple of throwaway social links, like legitimately garbage ones. I don't know how to describe it. Like there's a guy who was like upset that he was eating too much. There was one with, I believe Tanaka was his name, who you end up seeing has a store that's a secret one on the TV in Persona 4. And I think it's even in Persona 5. But they're not relatively interesting in some aspects. There are good ones, like I like the librarian. I like some of the character arcs that are tied to characters you're familiar with. That type of stuff is cool. Like when you start off Junpei's social link and he takes you out to eat because he's just kind of worried about you. That type of stuff I personally enjoy when I was going through Persona 3 Portable on my Xbox, by the way, which is just crazy to think about. But perhaps what is consistent amongst all of these games that's great is the story. The Persona 3 story, I would say, is the most dark and mature one, and certainly the most sad one of the 3. Some people have some issues with the villain group. If you were to ask me personally, I haven't really liked a single villain in Persona outside of Persona 5 Royals villain, specifically Royals, if you catch my drift. Where it comes to 3 and 4, they're not bad, they're just not the reason I'm there, and it doesn't influence my opinion on the game negatively, it's just not the part I really care the most about. Like for Persona 4, it's not about necessarily the main villain, but it's more about the whodunit mystery. Once you find it out and put all the pieces together, I will admit, like, they kind of had me fooled the whole time. Some people tell me it's obvious. I don't think so. But when it happened, I was like, okay, cool, got it. Like, okay, got it. Let's move on. I don't know. It just didn't hit me as hard. Whereas Persona 3, some have had the same reaction to the villain group. Just like, okay, got it. Moving on. But for me, it's the theme that carries all of these games. That's why I think sometimes the villain doesn't really matter. Like in the case of Persona 4, it's reach out to the truth. In Persona 5, it's fighting against injustice. In Persona 3, the reason it's so sad, the theme is life and death. And I mean, you take one look here at Persona 3 Portable, and you'll see on the inside, boom, you got coffins all over the manual, right above Orpheus. I talked about Thanatos earlier, hovering over the protagonist. You're like, what is going on here with this life and death theme? And that's what makes it so compelling, so interesting. The unfortunate part is, to some folks, they feel the story ends on a cliffhanger. They pick it up in Arena Ultimax, and we are still seeking some sort of resolution in certain elements to Persona 3's story. And we really have yet to get that. And a lot of people are holding their breath for like a Persona 5 arena that maybe continues that story, but why would you do that in Persona 5? So it's maybe a mistake that they continued it in Arena Ultimax, depending on who you ask. But to me, the story, the characters, the grittiness, it's all great because it's driven by that core theme. Like even down to, remember I pointed out here in Persona 3's manual, how there are actually silhouettes in the opening part of the manual where they have the evokers to their head. Now, I'm not trying to celebrate super dark themes too hard here, but this is raw. Like the way they call in their personas by putting the evokers to their head. And when you talk about that opening cutscene with Yukari where she's like shaking in Persona 3 Portable and drops the gun, it's like that fear that takes her over. That is, to me, the coolest part about summoning personas in the entire series, is the way the evoker is handled and how it connects to everything else in the game. Now, the reason Tartarus is appearing, the reason that you're summoning personas, is because of this thing I talked about earlier with the manuals called the Dark Hour. The Dark Hour is this hidden hour within the night where everyone is in their coffins except for certain people. And this is where Tartarus appears. So the mystery that's pushing you through the game is, we have to go deeper and deeper and deeper into Tartarus until we can find out what's at the top and why this thing exists at all. And it slowly develops from there. Now, what's cool about Persona 3 Portable, the most accessible version, is that there are differences in endings and in social links depending on who you play as. If you want what they call the definitive experience, you play as the male. I suggest playing as the female protagonist. I love the soundtrack in Persona 3, don't get me wrong, but the female protagonist in Persona 3 has some really good music that I think just justifies it on its own. Also, her look is cool. But these characters are strong, Mitsuru and I just being my personal favorites. Yukari, I think, is a little underrated, although when it comes to the answer, there are some problems with how Yukari is as a character. A lot of people think she's just kind of mean, she's kind of a bully, and you can even get that vibe in Persona 3. It's a product of its time in a lot of ways, but I understand where people are coming from what I've experienced. Quite frankly, I actually have yet to finish the answer. It's something that I'm still playing through, and it's something I want to talk about here on the channel in like a separate playing for the first time video. But otherwise, that is the history of Persona 3, and whether or not it's that good or bad, it depends who you ask. For me, if you're playing Portable, I think you got to lean a bit into the ignorance is bliss. You're going to miss some scenes, but you might not know any better. You could try to look them up online afterwards if you're super curious, but I think overall they take the most important scenes there and give them context. What you will lose in Portable, though, is that connection, because I love visual novels. One of my favorite series is Danganronpa, for example. I also love Zero Escape. But what you're going to lose in this is that ability to connect, because those 3D environments, watching them interact, watching cutscenes unfold, there is that added element instead of watching it be displayed in a text box that is missing in Portable. But I think with the control of the party members, with the story that is there, with the music, with the female protagonist, you do get, I think, a good experience there. But the ultimate answer has to come from ATLUS. They probably should have, with this re-release, just pulled everything together, put the answer in Persona 3 Portable, had those options from 3 Portable available, and in an ideal world, I would have loved the FES style gameplay with the 3D exploration, with the female protagonist, but I think we're just asking too much from ATLUS, because again, as I always say, they're just allergic to money-making decisions. So I don't think they're gonna do something obvious like that. So I try to give them the easy way out, like go port some simple things from Persona 3 into Portable, and you don't have to make new models or anything. It's just art at this point in time. Not that it's simple, but it's more simple in comparison, you'd have to imagine. So that's where we're at with Persona 3. A game that I do like a lot, a game that I don't love as much as 4 and 5, but it holds a special place in my heart. Because once you get to the end of the game, you'll have that moment where you're like Sora on the train heading to Yen Sid's tower in KH2, where he's like, you know, I'm sad. And that was me when I beat it. I was like, not crying or anything, but I was like, I'm pretty sad now. That was a sad video game. And that's something you have to prepare for. Like I said with Persona 4, there's like no better feel-good experience in my eyes. But with Persona 3, it's like, this is just a sad game in a lot of ways, and you'll learn as you go through why it is such. But that's all I got to say on Persona 3. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's your time to chime in, so fire away down below. What do you think of Persona 3? I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts down below. Other than that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace